Hi everyone. This video is part 1 of a 4-part video series that I am doing in memory of the September 11th, 2001 attacks. This year is the year 2021, and that makes it the 20th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 attacks. So how I'm going to be doing this video series, it is going to be over the course of 3 days, September 9th, 10th, and 11th, 2021. I'm going to be having 3 videos related to books, and the 4th video is going to be a surprise. Each of the books is going to be about September 11th, 2001. All types of different books told from people who were there or who experienced it. Now me, I was about 12 years old, or I had just turned 12 the month before in 2001 when the attacks happened. So I was a child. I still have memories of the attacks, things that I can remember that I didn't block out over the course of time. And I wanted to just share some of my personal story and how I connected with the stories of others who had been in the attacks or were associated with, almost directly affected by the attacks. The first book that I am going to be speaking about for part 1 is called In the Shadow of the Fallen Towers. The seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years after the 9/11 attacks, and it was written and illustrated by Don Brown. Now, I actually came across this book by accident. It was actually what sparked me to do this video series about September 11th, 20th anniversary. I was reviewing a different book that Don Brown had illustrated, and when I went to his website to get more information about him, I noticed that he was actually coming out with a book about September 11th. This book was published this year, and it is a graphic novel. I wanted to select a children's book to start off with because I was a child when the attacks happened, and I think that when you have a subject matter that is so terrible and so tragic that you have to, use a special way of sharing it with children. Sometimes introducing them to certain things too early can be very traumatizing for them. So I believe a graphic novel is one of the tools that you can use to give them a visual idea, yet not traumatize them. Just give them accurate history. I really enjoyed this book because I think it covered most of everything I noticed when I was a child going through this experience. So before I tell you about the book, let me tell you a little bit about Don Brown. So it says at the front, 2-time Sibert honoree, Orbis Pictus and Yalsa Award for Excellence in Nonfiction winner Don Brown turns to one of the most defining tragedies of our time, September 11, 2001. So it says, Don Brown is the award-winning author and illustrator of many books for young readers. Visit him online at booksbybrown.com and on Instagram at Don's Art. So it's DONSART if you're on Instagram. He also writes other graphic novels. They all seem to be history related. He has one about the flu epidemic of 1918. He has one about the Syrian refugees. It's called The Unwanted. He even has one about Hurricane Katrina. That happened, I think, 2005. Drowned City, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, and the Great American Dust Bowl. I really like authors like this who touch subject matters that other people are just like, oh, this is too much for me to touch. I don't think I can convey this in the appropriate way. If you go to his website, you'll see a host of other things that he has written. It says about Don Brown. Let me go see. Well, it's taking too long, so. It says, He has been widely praised for his resonant storytelling and his delicate watercolor paintings that evoke the excitement, humor, pain, and joy of lives lived with passion. School Library Journal has called him a current pace setter who has put the finishing touches on the standards for storiographies. He lives in New York with his family, and this is John Brown. I don't know if you can see him. Well, my janky phone, but that's what he looks like. Very excellent illustrator and author. As I stated before, this book was published in 2021, so I actually got like an early copy, or I pre-ordered it and I finally got it. I was very glad to get it. The first detail I noticed when I got this book was at the front, he has a picture of the old World Trade Center towers. And at the back, he has the, I think it's called the One World Trade Center. This is the tower the most recent tower that they built. Now, a lot of people that I've talked to, I didn't really know much about the towers. I didn't either. I had to read a lot about the towers, the original towers, the layout of the towers, and there were things I learned about it that I didn't know. And it was either one or both of the towers. I believe it was just one. There was a restaurant at the top called Windows of the World, or Windows on the World, and you'd overlook the whole city and you would eat. There were, in the lower parts, there was like borders, there were places to eat, there was like a little mall going on. A lot of the ideas I had about the towers as a child was it was just offices. I thought it was just offices. I didn't know there were all of these things going on with the towers. And I also didn't know how complicated the layout of the towers were until I started reading the accounts of it. Now with the new world, or One World Trade Center, there was a long debate about what the design should be before they finally settled on the design. The height of the tower is 1,776 feet, I think, and it's paying homage to the year 1776 when the United States was founded, or the Declaration of Independence. I can't remember. I'm not that much of a history buff, but that is the exact height of the tower. Or maybe it's stories, but 1,776. And it is very well built, even though the other one was well built. They made sure that this one was extra, extra, extra secure. Now, if you didn't know before, some people don't know it, the towers had actually been attacked before. In 1993, there was a bombing, and they just didn't see it coming. So it says Jules Naudet runs for his life. That's how the story starts off. Has his eyes big. It goes. At the top, what the author / illustrator does is he puts the date and he also puts a time. I don't know if it's the exact time or how much he had to research, but that's what happened. So how did Jules end up here? It says that morning, Jules had been with the New York City Fire Department Chief Joseph Pfeiffer and his firefighting crew in Lower Manhattan, filming a documentary about the fire department, when the sound of a low-flying jet caught everyone's attention. Naudet swung his camera and filmed a jetliner slamming into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. So, of course, that was one of the first images a lot of people on the television saw. When I was a child, I had actually just been on a plane the month before. I don't know if I was on a plane August 11, 2001, but it was definitely August 2001. We were going from Cleveland to St. Louis. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. So my mother and I had gone there to Cleveland for her job, for an expo. And I was already very terrified of planes. I had had a very deep fear of airplanes ever since I was a little girl. I was afraid they would crash. So I'm on this plane at 12 years old. I had just turned 12, and I was afraid. And the lady sitting next to me was like, "Oh, it'll be okay, honey. Everything's going to be fine." I said, "Well, what if the plane crashes?" She said, "Oh, planes don't crash." I said, "What if a plane crashes into a building?" And she's like, "Oh, planes don't crash into buildings." So I get home, and not long after that, Aaliyah died. Aaliyah, the singer, died in a plane crash. And I didn't know who she was, but it solidified in my mind. I'm like, I'm never getting on an airplane again. And I did not get on an airplane until 19 years later. So when September 11th happened, people, it's one thing where I don't know how to explain it. It's one thing where you're in a war, okay? You know something's about to happen. You know there's a bomb that might come from here. You know there's like a trap somewhere. But just you're in your regular schmegular day and an airplane crashes into your building. And not only that, a second one crashes. A lot of people weren't ready for anything like that. They had never really seen anything like that before, because it was on live television. So for some people, when they watch the footage of this event happening, is very traumatic, is very triggering. I know I was triggered because no matter what channel I turned on, it was on the news all day long, all day long. That's all they showed all day long. The plane crashing into the tower, the plane crashing into the tower. That's why if you see just even a plane near a tower, you'll know what event this is. The two towers. Anyway, so he says, "I didn't even have time to think. I just run. Then I feel someone jumping on top of me, and then the dust. At that point, I realized I was going to die. Dead silence, no radio calls, no sound, no nothing. I feel the person on top of me get up, and I recognize it's Chief Pfeiffer. He jumped on me to protect me." Now, one thing from all of the reading that I've been doing over 2 months to prepare for this, was it 2 months? Maybe about a month and a half to prepare my mind for this subject matter. From all of the stuff I've read, it was just like danger everywhere. Being on the ground was dangerous. Even if you weren't in the buildings, being on the ground was very, very dangerous. Because if you remember the original footage, people were jumping from the tops of the buildings because it was so hot. They had no way to escape. It was like, it's either you go this way and you get burned alive, or you risk it and jump to the ground. Which one are you going to do? They didn't know what to do because it was so hot. It was jet fuel, or so they reportedly say. It depends on who you ask, because everybody has their own theory of what happened. But if it was a plane that crashed into there, it was very, very hot. The way it crashed, if you were on the upper floors, like a certain amount of the upper floors, you were basically trapped. There was, I don't know if it was one building or both of the buildings, but like the jet fuel went down the elevator and killed some of the people in the lobby, because it was basically like a great fireball coming out and just killing everybody. People like burning to death. That's how tragic it was. And even if you were on the ground, you had things falling from the building. You had people falling from the building. You had furniture falling from the building. You had all of these things blasting out. You had shards coming to you. That's why when that great plume, that great smoke came out and covered everybody, it had toxic materials in it. It had asbestos, I think. It had just broken chairs and computer parts and papers and jet fuel and all sorts of toxic materials. That's why at the beginning of this book, he dedicates it to those who are suffering as a consequence of their work at the pile, because a lot of people ended up years later getting illnesses related to being exposed to the toxins of the World Trade Center crashing. Not just the World Trade Center, probably even the Pentagon. So, anyway. Let me see. It says, within the ocean of rubble are Port Authority police officers John McLaughlin and Will Gimeno, both nearly crushed by the debris that had been the South Tower. Fire swims through the wreckage. Bullets start to fly when the flames and heat set off ammunition from fallen police officers' firearms. So it's just a pile of rubble. You know what's very interesting from the things that I've read, especially the most recent book that I read, is originally people just thought it was a fire. And the first tower that got hit, the people next door were like, what is that? Oh, I wonder if it's just a Cessna plane that crashed into the tower. Oh, it's a fire. We're like, oh, get out. But they weren't really taking it that seriously. Some of them were, but some of them were like, oh, it's a fire next door. But they didn't realize the magnitude of what was happening until they started seeing people falling and all sorts of things happening. But a lot of people didn't realize that the towers were going to crash. They just thought it was a fire drill, or they could just go downstairs and be okay. In fact, a lot of people went back up to their offices because they were told to go back up to their offices while the fire was happening. I don't know if it was in the first building that was on fire, but it was basically the second, or maybe the building next to it. I can't remember. I get them confused. I don't want to say north and south and get historically inaccurate facts for you. But a lot of people perished because they were told to go back to their offices by people that were going back to their offices by the alarm system. Because after the 1993 bombing, they had the fire practice. Like, you have the fire warden. You had to get people out. You're practicing your drill. I want to say that year they had, they had a whole system about how to do their little fire drill thing. But this was like no fire drill they could ever comprehend, because like, how are you going to imagine an airplane crashing into your building? But anyway, so it says, guys, I see the sunshine. Hold on. So they call what we call like the ground zero. The author says the people call the pile because it was just a pile. It was a pile, a mass of everything. People were evacuating the city. People were afraid to go to certain places because they were afraid that it would be another attack. Some of them were mistaking military planes for more airliners that were going to attack them. But what's beautiful about, even though it was very tragic, were the people that helped each other. There were a lot of people that saved each other's lives. There were people, for example, in the towers carrying down those who couldn't make it down. Like if they were very large in size, or if they were in a wheelchair, or they couldn't use their legs or something to get away. There were a lot of people that carried people down, that helped people, guide them through the fire and all sorts of things. There were a lot of people that didn't leave each other behind. And there were a lot of firefighters who went up there knowing they were going to die, but they went up there anyway, just to see if they could save somebody. It was a very beautiful story of how humanity can bond with other people. That's one thing I personally remember from when I was a child, seeing all of that. I remember seeing all of the flags waving, and I'm not patriotic at all. Like, I'm really not patriotic, but I do remember that one thing. Like, there were American flags everywhere. I remember a lot of people were so afraid of what would come next because they didn't know what was going to come next. There were anthrax attacks, they say, that went in the mail. People dying from opening up their mail and various things. So he goes along and moves to the Pentagon. It says about 200 miles south in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, home to the military, burns after a third jetliner crashes into it. There were dead and gravely injured people on the ground. Soon ambulances, fire trucks, and emergency vehicles are everywhere. Search and rescue teams bring special equipment, cranes, and dogs. It is a battle with fire and smoke. So, I'm sorry, I'm having flashbacks from when I was a child to see what I can remember. What was different then and how September 11 changed everything for now. So before the attacks, me personally, I had never heard of the World Trade Center. I had never heard of the Pentagon. Like, I really wasn't, I don't know. I only knew what I knew at the time. And government and different things, like maybe I should know the Pentagon. It was like, oh, you should know your government. But I really wasn't interested in politics or government as a child. I just didn't care. Honestly, that wasn't my focus. I really didn't care. So the first time I heard about like the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and all of that was when the attacks happened. I have my own little personal view of New York in my mind as a child. I didn't know much about New York. I just knew what was exposed to me on television. I usually associated New York with Broadway. That's the one main thing I remember. So I thought it was a fun city and all sorts of things. And I didn't realize is brevity the word I can use? I didn't realize the brevity of what had happened until time passed by, because I did not understand what was going on. As far as the Pentagon, they say that the Pentagon, I don't know how many casualties were in the Pentagon. I personally believe the Pentagon was more prepared than the Twin Towers, the people in the Twin Towers, because the Pentagon had a lot of people there that had, from what I've read of accounts, military experience. One of the books that I read, it had survivors of the Pentagon, and from their accounts, it seemed like people there had more of the practice tools on how to survive a situation like this. In fact, one of the things that they had been practicing earlier that year were drills of how you would respond, or how the Pentagon would respond if an airplane crashed into the Pentagon. That was one of their practices that they were doing, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I don't know how many casualties that they had there. Sometimes people, when they just say September 11th, they just think of the Twin Towers because that was the one you saw it happening on live television, whereas the Pentagon, you didn't see it happening on live television. In fact, when the airplane hit the Pentagon, they had just gotten word about the Twin Towers, so some of them were actually looking at the Twin Towers being attacked in the Pentagon, or so they say. So a lot of the people there, I personally think there may have been more survivors. I have to research it, because number one, the Pentagon was not as large as the World Trade Center. It was big, but it was not in height. It was not as big as the World Trade Center. So you did have people jumping, but I don't think they had to jump that far. Like, I don't know how many stories it was, but it wasn't like skyscraper tall, where when you jump to your death. At least you had some type of chance. And it says, Washington, D.C. Hold on. Pentagon workers plunge into the smoke-filled building to restore water pressure made feeble by pipes broken in the attack. Without water, there is no firefighting. Look at how the illustrator author uses all of these colors, the gray muted colors. I really like it. It's not too bright. I feel like sometimes when you make something too bright, it's almost insulting, especially when you're talking about something very tragic. Sometimes you don't need bright colors because this is a heavy subject. Adding to the confusion is yet another downed jetliner in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. First responders find no survivors. So that one, I think, is Flight 93. 4 downed jetliners, 3 used as weapons. President George Bush is taken from a Florida elementary school he had been visiting to Air Force One, the presidential jet. So at that time, George Bush was reading some books to these school children and who had been specially selected to meet him and have the stories read. And it was during his little story time that one of his crew came up and told him that America was under attack. And yeah, you can look that up yourself, because they have video footage of the guy that told him that America was under attack. And George Bush also states what his initial response was, that America was under attack. They recently interviewed the children, or one of the children that was in the classroom when they told him that the World Trade Center had been attacked. And he actually gave a little, he had a moment of silence for the attacks at the school. He told them what had happened, made a public announcement. So anyway, so over the next few weeks, people helping each other, people searching for those who are lost. It took a very long time to clean up the pile. A lot of people could not handle cleaning up the pile because after a while, the amount of survivors started to diminish. They didn't find any more. They just kept finding bodies or parts of bodies. It says, rescue workers and volunteers form bucket brigades to carry off debris, heroic work that has little effect on the massive wreckage. All around is beeping, the sound from automatic emergency locator devices firefighters wear, but finding the locator doesn't guarantee finding a firefighter. Then I talk about the animals and all of that. He also shows the missing posters because people were posting up images of their family members and loved ones and husbands and friends who were missing. They didn't know what had happened to them. They could have been killed. They could have been in the hospital. They didn't know what happened to them. And they were also having makeshift memorials. Makeshift memorials appear on railings and parks, on building walls, bouquets and notes of tributes, prayers, and laments too. Then it says, President Bush comes to New York and tours the devastation. He thanks the rescuers. They said, I can't hear you. He said, I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon. And they're like, USA, USA. See, that's one thing I remember. Out of all of the brief memories I have of September 11th, the one I remember is how very, very, very patriotic people were. And mind you, I was not patriotic, so that's why I remember it. I was like, wow, this is I didn't know what questions to ask, because if you asked any questions, like you were anti-American and people will curse you out or something. So I just didn't say nothing. I was just like, I'm like, what's going on? Just watching as things went by. Because there was a surge in flag sales. There was a surge in, like, you don't question anything. Like, you don't question anything. You don't question the troops. You don't question what the government is doing. You don't question nothing, because it would be considered rude and unpatriotic. That's one memory that I do have. Another memory that I have that a lot of these books don't talk about. Muslim Americans received threats and hate crimes against them soared 20 times greater than the previous year. There are actually some killed for being Muslim, right? Some of these people weren't even Muslim. Some of them had a completely different belief system and were just wearing head coverings. But I remember this part because I don't know if it was in St. Louis or Missouri where they were attacking Muslims. And I personally did not understand Islam. The only exposure I had to Islam were like the black Muslims that I would see in the barbershop, but I didn't talk to them about their belief system. I didn't really know much about Islam. My first, I guess, consistent exposure to it was through what the news was saying. And at that point, I was getting very confused because one group was saying, it is a religion of hate. And the other group was like, no, our religion is not hate. That is not what Islam is saying. And these are coming from Muslims. And I remember hearing stories on the news about Muslims being attacked, like people attacking them. And the first thought that I thought was like, well, why are they attacking them if the Muslims said that this was not a part of their belief system? Like, why are they attacking them? I just didn't understand. I just thought they were going to take their word for it. But even today, when you ask or when you bring it up, you're still going to have some type of division between it. It's still a hotbed topic, even though people don't want to act like it's a hotbed topic. But it is. It's a very touchy subject because a lot of people just don't understand. They don't read or research Islam. They don't read about the different customs or anything. They're like, oh, they're Muslim. They're wearing a head covering. You know how many people wear head coverings? You got Sikhs. You got people practicing Ifa. Like you have some Jewish people wearing head coverings. You have all sorts of people wearing head coverings. That doesn't mean that they're Muslim. But I don't know. I think it also had to do with like falling under the umbrella of the whole like super patriotic feeling after. It says on September 20th, Bush delivers a speech to Congress. Americans are asking who attacked our country. The evidence we have gathered all points to a collection of loosely affiliated terrorist organizations known as Al-Qaeda. The terrorists practice a fringe form of Islamic extremism that has been rejected by Muslim scholars and the vast majority of Muslim clerics, a fringe movement that perverts the peaceful teachings of Islam. Now, as I stated, it literally all depends on who you ask, because there's so many different groups that have their own opinions. Like, there's some that believe that it was Al-Qaeda. There's some that believe that it was not Al-Qaeda, that it was actually the United States itself. There's some that believe it was the United States working with it. Like, it's so many different theories about what happened that I haven't even formed a theory on what happened. I don't know. I literally don't know. But what I do know, in regards to coming to terms with how I feel about September 11th, the only opinion I have is that it was sociopaths and psychopaths using innocent people as collateral to further their psychopathic, sociopathic agenda. That is how I personally feel about it. I don't know which group of sociopaths it is, because sociopaths, psychopaths, they work in ways that the regular person cannot imagine. As you can see with the tragedies that happened, the towers falling, the Pentagon being attacked, and regular people's responses, the first thing regular people who have souls did was help each other and try to care for each other and try to support each other. The regular human being cannot get their mind to a level so diabolical that it would use manipulation tactics to destroy somebody to further some type of sick agenda. I don't know. But that's how I personally feel about it. From the pile, a smell carries to uptown Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and nearby New Jersey. It is the smell of death. The author also does a good job of showing the war. Like, he doesn't just focus on the United States. He shows like how September 11th affected everyone around the world. It says, on October 7th, the sky above the Afghanistan capital, Kabul, is lit by tracers of anti-aircraft guns. American and British bombs and missiles strike with thunder and flash. One American bomber had a poignant message painted on his nose. It says, NYPD, we remember. That's what it says on the plane. NYPD, we remember. So it keeps going on and on and on and on, and the years are passing. The city of New York manages the disaster. Fire and police leaders, construction bosses, engineers, and government officials crowd into a kindergarten room at a nearby school and decide the tactics of recovery. And he talks about like creating, just draining the water, the Hudson River and the hole, the gap. Like, is this a lot of engineering? Let's see. Despite the labor and hopes of the searchers at the pile, only dead people are recovered. There was a pervasive sadness and even tears when everyone knew. It changed from the rescue effort to a recovery effort. No one spoke. In November, city leaders try to speed the cleanup at the pile and direct search teams to be reduced. Angry firefighters see this as a callous to fallen firefighters who have yet to be recovered. The city may be ready to turn this into a construction site, but we're not. We want our brothers back. About 1,000 firefighters gather outside the pile. Fighting breaks out when police try to maintain order. After emotions cool, it is decided that the number of searchers will remain the same. This is very difficult. It is very hard. You just have this pile, this tragic pile there. In March 2002, remembrances of the 9/11 tragedy are held in New York, Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Though sorrowful, the bravery of first responders and ordinary civilians is celebrated, including the passengers of Flight 93 who died at Shanksville. In downtown New York City, banks of searchlights shine forward and make 2 towers of light, ghostly reminders of the buildings that once stood there. The years are passing. And it talks about them having the memorial, finding about, I guess, discovering, was it not Bin Laden? The flag. Elsewhere in New York, architects for Larry Silverstein, the businessman who had bought the World Trade Center just 6 weeks before the attack, draft plans for a replacement of the downed structures. They envision a soaring building the same size as the destroyed towers. And even just creating the buildings in the museum had a lot of input in it, not only just from architects, engineers, but also people who had lost loved ones in the towers. On September 11, 2002, America marks the one-year anniversary of the attack. President Bush takes part in ceremonies at the Pentagon in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and then travels to New York City. There in the dirt that had once been the foundation of the World Trade Center, a rough ring is constructed. In it, mourners place flowers, photographs, and American flags. And they start saying the names of the 2,726 people. And they speak their names like a libation statement. Then it says, afterward, he talks about the war in Afghanistan. He talks about the attacks on Muslims in the back. I personally, how I feel the world changed after September 11th. I wish I could put it into words without fumbling over my words. I wouldn't say America was like just this innocent place, like, oh, we're just so innocent. Oh, yeah, we're so innocent and nothing happens to us. But a lot of people, that was the first time they had ever seen anything like that in their life. Like, it literally combined all of the fears people had in one day, like fear of airplanes, fear of plane crashes, fears of being trapped in elevators, jumping from buildings, that's fear of heights, like fear of being trapped, falling, fears of falling, not knowing what's going to happen next, not knowing who your enemy is or what else is going to be attacked next, and it's all on live television. All on live television for the whole world to see, not only in this state, but then another state. Now this coming to your house in envelopes. So people were just very, very, very afraid. It was terrorism. They're being terrorized, mentally, physically terrorized. I don't know if the United States had had anything like that before, like an experience like that before. I know we had wars, but usually most of the wars took place outside of the United States. It wasn't on the soil, on American soil. Yes, we had very terrible things like enslavement, which I'm sure we still have somewhere. It was not documented, but we had enslavement and all sorts of things. But I don't think anybody was prepared for something so off guard and so terrible all in one day, because everybody was basically affected. They didn't differentiate between anyone. It was just everybody and some sociopaths. So after that, I feel people became more on edge. Travel became much more scary, much more restricted. I believe that's when they started doing the well, they might have already been doing it. You know, recording our calls, listening to our calls. I just feel that some type of innocence was lost. And I don't know, even though America's not like an innocent place, but I feel like there was some, at least the last remnants of innocence the country had was gone. Just nobody was very complacent anymore. The things that we got away with in the 90s and the early 2000s, or well, before 2001, the things we got away with back then, we couldn't repeat again. You know? Securities change. Religious relations amplified. I just know a lot of people were thrown off. And when you're thrown off, you either get traumatized or you prepare for what could possibly come. So that is all I have to say about that. This concludes part 1 of my September 11th series. Part 2's video is going to be very interesting. I think you're going to really like it. I'm going to be sharing 2 books instead of 1 book. And you'll get to see lots of pretty pictures. So yes, if you have a young person in your life and you want to share this book with them, I would highly recommend it. So thank you all for watching this video and have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.